Oh, it's good this image is up. So I want to thank John for his very generous talk, and I hope you'll see mine is in the same spirit, but it starts in a different way. So let's see how it goes. And I want to thank Jack Flam especially, and the others at Dedalus and at the Archives for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. At the Guggenheim Museum in the 70s, I stopped to look at a medium-sized gestural abstraction by Motherwell. I think it was up toward the top in one of the bays. Around the black brush marks, there was a yellowish tan color that looked at first to me a stain or a bleed that comes out around liquid black oil paint when it is put on white cotton duck or paper. I had noticed and been fascinated by these bleeds in paintings by Pollock and others. But looking more closely at the Motherwell, I found that his stains were in fact brushed on. They were tan acrylic paint that seemed to be painted to imitate the look of an oil bleed. I was deeply offended. I thought that doing this was unbelievably phony, a betrayal of authenticity, an attempt at disguise. And being very righteous in those days, I mentioned this often as a final proof to my friends when criticizing Motherwell's work. As John says, he was uncool, and my teacher at the studio school was Milton Resnick, who, like others of that generation, had something against Motherwell. And I'm ashamed to admit I took on Milton's attitude when I shouldn't have. So to me, finding this confirmed to me other negative attitudes that I had heard from my teachers. So, a little justice. Now in my own recent paintings, I have been making painted gestures and then cutting out the shape of the background around these marks. Then there is often another color around the cutout shape. My goal is to make it seem as if the gesture had somehow changed the color of the background, an effect backwards in time. These new paintings also have strong actual oil bleeds around the wet gestures. These bleeds are very shiny and flicker in and out when there is side lighting. I'll show some images later on. So recently, showing these paintings to my friends, this idea of the oil bleed kept coming up. And it got me to think back on seeing these Motherwells, and I couldn't deny that, in fact, now I was doing something very similar to exactly what I'd been so critical of. I guess that's the way it goes, right, John? Yeah. So I became very fascinated, and when I was asked to participate in this, I thought it'd be a good chance to now investigate this issue. And just to say something in general, this issue of the oil bleed or stain is one that is very important to painting. It relates to the drip, the blot, gesture, spot, blob, blot, blotch, patch, whack, or even punctum from Roland Barthes. And there's a wonderful French theorist that I love, Georges Didi Huberman, who is especially interested in this issue. He writes about Fra Angelico and talks about him throwing and splattering paint to make artificial images of stone, and talks about this in relation to Christianity. untamed material behaving on its own, freed materiality, untouched, splatters of liquid, consecration, anointing. It has all these connotations, and I think it's very important to painting. Okay. And they've given me some images. Let's see, so I can put this here. Of the Motherwells, and this is the one that's probably the most like the painting I saw. And can you see what I saw? That the brown on the outside is painted in around the edge. And here's another that's just as interesting, that the brown seems to have been done underneath and the black on top. And this whole emphasis on what the edge is, and even having that drip come out where it's unexpected, is wonderful, sophisticated interest in these edges that I now appreciate. And here's another kind of example where I think it's a black on tan paper with then white painted in as a background. So again, you get these strange, complex edges. And here are other examples. And at first, they might look very direct, but in fact, they're not at all. You can see, say there's white painted below, and on top of it, there is some black paint. So that it's been done in some layers and changes. Very complicated, very sophisticated, very involved with edges, which is where things really happen in painting. I was at a symposium about Frankenthaler in New York, about a month ago. And at the end, Harry Cooper had a kind of, he did a reply about the different papers that had been presented. And the very last thing he mentioned in the conference was a strange subject. He brought up this idea of the oil bleed in relation to Frankenthaler's work. And he called it both a gift and a crutch. And said, in the end, he was sorry to see that she didn't get the bleeds out of the acrylic the way she did out of the oil. And this is an earlier oil painting, and you can see the bleed that comes around. And it has to do with how much oil is in the paint, how much physical paint there is. That determines the width of it and how wet the paint is. So a brush mark, say the black on the right, there's no oil bleed around it because it's more material without the oil and the medium in it. And on the left, there's a wide bleed. And in my paintings, in my outlining of the marks, I've been doing it kind of even. Now I'm going to switch and relate to the amount of material. Okay. This is a later painting, but you can see the top is acrylic, and it looks on the bottom, she either put a medium in to allow it to expand, or maybe that part is done in oil. And this is a later acrylic where you can see there's no oil stain, and what a difference it makes. And this is an interesting question. These are the Pollock paintings. And I saw these, what would it be, in the mid-60s. And these are done with Duco paint on raw canvas. And I remember seeing them, the paint was a cold, dark black. The canvas was cold white. And between them, there was a strong oil bleed. So it went cool, warm, cool, which is what you do if you want to model. If Rubens models an arm, that's what he does. So it set up a kind of jazzy space around it, a kind of optical space in which the figures existed. now I look at these same paintings and you can't see the oil at all. And they've either cleaned it, the canvas has darkened, something's happened, and to me they aren't the same paintings. So it's a kind of lesson in how important this oil bleed is and how fleeting it is. This is another Pollock, and it shows those kinds of edges and how the edges change with the amount of medium. This is really an experiment in that. This is called Yellow Island from '52. And the Newman Stations of the Cross can be seen as kind of studies in this bleed, where it often comes out from the oil paint into the white canvas. And the artists, they used what they call rivet, which was a kind of acrylic medium that would soak in, and they could control the amount of bleed by how much rivet they used. And in the stations, Newman uses both oil and acrylic and is very careful about how he uses these edges. It's a wonderful lesson, and I've seen him do amazing things. He'll have a black band on black, and then he'll have oil coming out of a different color of black, and so you can see he's repainted the black after he painted the first black with the oil stain. And then this is a group of paintings by Rothko, and I became fascinated with the way the drip in the bottom right became a kind of motif for him. And I think the process in these paintings are so important, and he used that as a way of getting at a certain content. So here's an actual drip. This is a hand-painted replica of a drip on the upper right, almost as if it even goes over a form. And here are some more such forms. And here in the middle of the painting, there's a drip going upwards, which he surely saw and knew about, and there's drips going downward on the bottom. So the paintings were worked in rotation. And this gives the whole painting a kind of lift and anti-gravitation that, to me, is what makes it work. And then this is the painting at the modern, and now when I look at these shapes, I see them as drips going in two directions. Something physically impossible, but something that would fascinate Rothko. Oh, and now Jack encouraged me, so like John, I have some of my own work, and you can see, this is my confession, I guess. You can see how close I am to that Motherwell painting in the oil bleed. And on this image, you can see on the bottom right some of the oil, or on the top center, some of the oil, how bright it is from different angles. It doesn't show up often in photographs of abstract expressionist paintings, and I think that's because they take them straight on from the front. But as you move from side to side, it flickers, and that has a real effect on the space of the painting. And on the bottom right, you can see it's picking up, there's a lawn outside, and that's the green of the grass reflecting on the oil stain. Yeah, pretty close, right? So, preparing this and looking at these images, I'm seeing even more than I expected how my work is imitating that, artificially imitating that look of the oil stain. Okay. Thank you all very much.